thrilled to welcome back the senior senator, the great state here, New Hampshire, and needless to say, a great friend to the New England Council, and I'm sure to each and every person in this room. Now in her third term on Capitol Hill, the senator has a well-earned reputation as someone who's willing to work across the aisle to advance policies that promote economic growth, quality of life here in New England and across this great country. Case in point, last year she played a key role in negotiating the landmark bipartisan infrastructure bill, which will make billions in investment to upgrade our roads and bridges, improve public transportation, and expand broadband access for all. Throughout her time in the United States Senate, she's been a champion for small businesses, an advocate for our nation's armed forces and defense sector, and has found tirelessly to combat and prevent opiate addiction here in the Granite State and beyond. Needless to say, we are honored that she could join us this morning amidst a very, very busy lame duck session of Congress to update us on the latest development and also to share her priorities for the 118th Congress. Please join me in welcoming our guest, the Honorable United States Senator Jeanne Shaheen.
Thank you, Jim, for that very nice introduction. It's so wonderful to see everyone in person this morning. It makes me feel very festive, ready for the holidays to see everybody. And I was, as I was thinking about this event this morning, I was reminded by my staff, and most of you I think know Sarah Holmes, who is my state director, who is here, and Tina Kasim, who is working on business issues. But they reminded me that the last time I spoke to all of you, it was on Zoom, and we were talking about infrastructure, so to be in person is just great. I really wanted to start this morning by reviewing a little bit of the last 2 years. If you're like me, the time since 2020 when COVID hit is sort of a blur. So I think it's helpful to look back at what's happened because so much has happened. And we had a chance to hear yesterday in Washington from Heather Cox Richardson, who is an historian and professor at, I think, Boston College. But one of the things she said that I thought was, that made me very proud, was she said that this has been the most productive Congress since the Great Society programs in the 1960s. And so, as we think about the challenges and the reports of how partisan things are in Washington and how divided the country is, I thought it was helpful to think about what we've accomplished in the last couple of years in Congress. We passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was the biggest investment in infrastructure in this country since the interstate highway system. We passed postal reform. Since I have been in Washington, and I got there in 2009, we've been talking about the need to address our postal system. And we finally did that last year in a way that no longer requires that they prepay their retirement benefits, which is what was really putting the postal system in jeopardy. We passed the PACT Act, which is legislation to expand health benefits for our veterans, particularly those veterans since 9/11. And what it really does is to address the veterans, particularly who have been affected by toxic exposure, burn pits. Those who served in Afghanistan and Iraq have really been affected by burn pits, and it gives them the health coverage that they need. We passed what we call Safer Communities legislation to address gun violence. The first time in 30 years we passed legislation that addresses gun violence. We passed the CHIPS and Science Act. The United States had been falling behind in production of semiconductors, which, as all of you know, BAE knows very directly, are important for everything from national security, from our weapon systems to refrigerators, to cell phones. And when I was governor, we were producing about 30% of the semiconductors in the world. Now we're producing 12%. And we're not only producing not enough, but the ones we're producing are not the smallest, the ones that are on the cutting edge. So what this legislation is going to do is allow us to make significant investments in the semiconductor industry, which right now is controlled about 80% by Taiwan. And you think about the challenge that we're facing with respect to China and their interest in controlling Taiwan. What happens if they invade Taiwan and we lose our access to that semiconductor industry? So a critical investment that's going to be really important. And it includes significant provisions on the science side for the National Science Foundation, for Rivier and UNH and all of the colleges and universities in New Hampshire. That's going to make a huge investment in the research that's going on our campuses. We just passed the Respect for Marriage Act. As many of you know, after the Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court, there was real concern that gay couples who are married were not going to be able to have their marriages recognized in other states. And so this legislation that just passed the House yesterday, it hasn't, I think the President signed it yesterday afternoon, means that couples no longer have to worry about that. Now, all of that legislation, and this was all, we did a lot of other things too, appointed the most judges by any administration since in the last few presidencies, I think since Bill Clinton. But all of that legislation was passed with bipartisan support. That was all done by Democrats and Republicans. So don't let anybody tell you that nothing's getting done in Washington because of the partisan divide. All of that got done because of bipartisan work. Now we did also pass some significant legislation with just Democratic votes, without Republican votes. The American Rescue Plan in early 2021 to help the country get through COVID and address the costs of COVID was passed. And that was really important, I think, as we think about how far we've come in terms of being able to address COVID, providing the vaccinations, getting those out to people, addressing the hospital costs of the COVID pandemic. That legislation has been really important. And in New Hampshire, we got about $2.5 billion through that legislation that got distributed at the state, county, and community level. We also, in August, passed what we call the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides really important resources to continue to address health care and expand access to health care. Right now, we're in the open enrollment period for the Affordable Care Act. If you have anybody you know who needs health insurance, please encourage them to sign up. We have navigators now who can help people as they're thinking about what policy and plan is best for them. But it provides an expansion of subsidies to help people afford the cost of health insurance, and that's really important. I think the real landmark change that legislation provides, however, is it, for the first time, allows Medicare and Medicaid to negotiate with Big Pharma for the costs of prescription drugs. And for anybody here who gets your prescription drugs through the VA, you'll know if you compare that to what people are paying on Medicare, there is a significant difference. And that's important because it means that it will encourage the private sector to reduce the costs of those prescription drugs. We also, as part of that legislation, made the biggest investment in addressing climate change in this country's history, $366 billion, which will help us reduce our emissions by 40% by 2030. So really significant investments. And while all of that, and part of the reason that's important is because it helps us address our energy costs. And I know that businesses and households in New Hampshire, people are really feeling the high cost of electricity and power. And one of the things that we brought along today is a resource guide that helps give people information on how to access those new resources through the Inflation Reduction Act. It also includes who to talk to at the state level and the utility level if you have questions about the high cost of your electricity and your energy. So I hope if you, we have those out, Sarah, in the back someplace.
On the table.
On the table, so please take one of these, share it with somebody. It's also online, and I hope will help as people are thinking about how to address the high cost of energy this winter. Now, while all that was going on, we also, as all of you know, I'm sure, had a major foreign policy challenge. Russia invaded Ukraine in February of this year, the biggest land war since World War II. And one of the things the United States did was to provide real leadership to help bring together a coalition to support Ukraine. I think this is the biggest foreign policy blunder by any leader since Hitler went into Russia in World War II. Putin's going into Ukraine. I think long term, this will be the end of Putin's leadership in Russia. Now, it's not going to happen right away, but what the United States did was to help bring together a coalition and work with NATO and with our allies in the West and in the Indo-Pacific as well to support Ukraine and continue to do that. I had the opportunity to meet with some women members of the Ukrainian military about a month or so ago. And they were looking for help for weapons, of course, because they have done a really amazing job of letting the world know and communicating the challenges that they're facing. But what she said to me, and I told her I was going to repeat this every time I had an opportunity at home in New Hampshire. She said, you need to give us the weapons so that we can fight the Russians so that you don't have to. And nothing says it for me better than that. If we don't stop Putin here, who knows where he's going to go next. And we know that it's not just the West that's watching what's going on here. It's our other adversaries. It's China, it's Iran, it's North Korea. What happens with this war in Ukraine is going to be significant as we protect democracy around the world. So this has been a huge endeavor on the part of the United States, and I'm very proud. I was up in Halifax at the International Security Forum right before Thanksgiving, and we had people from all over the world. And one of the things we heard again and again and again was how important America's leadership was and is in the world. So I think this is a challenge that will have ramifications for generations to come. And I'm very proud of the role that the United States has played. So we've got a lot done. We have a lot to do. For all of you who are watching what happens with the budget, we still need to get a budget done in the last 2 weeks here of this congressional session, and it's challenging. But anybody who has any contracts with the state knows that a continuing resolution for the next year, which is what is the option that's being discussed, is not an option that works for anybody. It's not good for our men and women who are serving in the military. It's not good for those people who are dependent on help from federal programs like the low-income heating assistance, who are really looking for that federal help this winter to get through the winter. It's not helpful for people who depend on Medicare and Medicaid, and it's certainly not helpful for our economy, our defense industry, and our businesses. So if you have any connections to anybody in Congress, please call them up, tell them that that is not acceptable, that we really need their help. We need to get this done. I know that there are questions, but I want to address one other issue before I open it up to questions. And that is One of the things that I think has been important about the work that we've done in the last 2 years, really since COVID, since the CARES Act, when we passed the help for small businesses, are the investments that we're making in the future of New Hampshire and the future of this country. The investments in innovation, the investments in healthcare so that people can feel secure, the investments in our infrastructure. And all of that, I think, is important if we're going to remain competitive. If we're going to remain competitive as a state and as a country, as we look at the challenges we're facing from China, this great power competition that we're in the world. And it's been disappointing to me to see that some of the funding that we have brought back to the state of New Hampshire has not gone out as expeditiously and in the way that we had really hoped that it would. One area that I think is particularly important in that regard is housing. Many of you know that housing has been one of the biggest challenges that we're facing in terms of getting workers. And we brought back rental assistance as the result of money passed in December of 2020, and then again in the American Rescue Plan. And unfortunately, the state did not get that money out in the way that we really needed to, and it left thousands of people in the queue looking for rental assistance. Now we've been able to replace some of the $18 million that got recouped because of a request to the Treasury, but only about $4 million of that $18 million. So we still have people who are looking for significant help for rental assistance, and I hope that that's going to get better. Another area that I'm very concerned about is child care. New Hampshire got $77 million for child care. And as you all know, one of the things that happened during COVID is that a lot of women, mostly women, left the workforce because they needed child care, because so many of our child care centers were not able to operate. In addition to that $77 million, which is mostly in help to people who need help with the cost of child care, the state got about $30 million to look at how to expand our child care network. It's been almost 2 years now. It's going to be 2 years before that money goes out. And I think that's unacceptable. And as the business community, you all should also think it's unacceptable. When money comes back to the state, we want to see it get spent as expeditiously and effectively as possible. And I hope you will help me in encouraging the administration to look at how to make sure we can spend those dollars in the best way possible. Another area is food. Sadly, one of the outcomes of COVID has been an increase in food insecurity in the state. And again, it's a place where there is money available at the federal level through the SNAP program, which is the successor to the food stamp program. And yet, the state has not put together a plan to enroll several, we think there are an estimated thousands of people who could benefit from enrolling in the SNAP program, and yet that hasn't been done. So these are areas that are basic to what people need in order to function. And as the business community, I hope you'll help me in encouraging the administration at the state level and in communities to really make sure that the money that's coming back to New Hampshire gets spent in a way that is effective and really gets done what is intended to get done. So I'm going to stop there. I really appreciate your attention this morning, and it's so nice to see all of you and to be here with Jen and with everybody at the New England Council, and look forward to answering your questions.
We have time for a few questions. Maybe I'll just ask the first question, Senator. You say that New Hampshire got some unsettling news this past week regarding the first in the nation primary here in New Hampshire, that there are some people maybe in the DNC that might be contemplating making the change that New Hampshire may be second in the 24 primary. Your thoughts on how this is playing out, and also your thoughts on what New Hampshire can do, or anyone else, to preserve the tradition that we have.
Well, first of all, like all of us here, I think, we all understand the important role that New Hampshire plays in the presidential selection process. I mean, one of the great things about the New Hampshire primary is that as a candidate, you can come here, you don't have to have a lot of money, you don't have to have a lot of name recognition, and you don't have to have a big board, be the establishment candidate, and you can get heard. People invite you into their living rooms, you can do town hall meetings, you can have an opportunity to really have your candidacy be seen by voters. And voters are engaged at a level that I think doesn't exist in many places around the country. One of the examples that Tom, I'm sure, can appreciate in particular is John McCain's candidacy. When he was running in 2000, and he was out of money, he had to lay off most of his campaign staff, and he came to New Hampshire, and he did, I forget how many town halls around the state. He got heard, and voters supported him over George W. Bush, who was then the establishment candidate, and he had a chance to get heard and have his candidacy seen. That doesn't exist in lots of other places, and that's what I think is so special about the New Hampshire primary. And I got, like many people, I got involved in politics in the New Hampshire primary, working for Jimmy Carter, who was a little-known politician from Georgia, and he was able to go on to become president. And I think if we don't have that opportunity because we've replaced New Hampshire by a big state or a state that doesn't have that kind of culture, and we don't develop that culture overnight. You know, we've had the New Hampshire primary for over 100 years. And we've had it because we said early on, 100 years ago, we don't think these decisions should be made just by party bosses in back rooms someplace. The voters need to have a chance to weigh in. And I think that's what got lost in the debate at the DNC Rules Committee. Now, we have a state law that says we're going to go first, so we're going to go first. And we're going to continue to provide an opportunity to invite candidates here. The party is talking about sanctioning candidates, but I've been part of those discussions before, and they didn't stand up because candidates like coming here, reporters like covering the New Hampshire primary, and the voters take it seriously. And so I think this is a long fight that's not over yet. You know, the party said it was going to sanction Michigan a number of years ago when Michigan went out of order, and they didn't wind up doing that. So I think we have just begun to fight, and we will continue to do that.
And then overnight, we read that one of your colleagues has now switched to become an independent, Kristen Sinema from Arizona. I know it doesn't really change the makeup of the body, and you don't lose any of the difference, don't lose any clothes. But do you think she's going to eventually caucus with Democrats, or is she just going to remain as an independent?
You know, I don't know, Jim. I assume that this decision also, I haven't talked to Kirsten since she made the decision, so I assume it also had to do with her re-election in Arizona. And I think she has been an incredibly productive member of the Senate, and I hope she will continue to be. I worked with her very closely. There were 10 of us who worked on that bipartisan infrastructure package. Kirsten was one of those 10, and she was really critical in helping to lead that effort. So I hope she will continue to stay engaged and do the good work that she's been doing.
One of the bills that's remaining in the lame duck session is that electoral count vote. How optimistic are you that this is going to pass?
So Jim's not going to give anybody else a chance.
You're the mic, Senator. You know what happens.
You know, if we can get an omnibus passed, I think we can get it done. And again, the Electoral Count Act is an effort to address the discrepancies that exist in the current law that really made what happened on January 6th problematic in terms of the procedural situation with respect to the transition of power. And again, this has been a bipartisan effort. I worked on this along with Susan Collins and Joe Manchin and a number of others. And Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer had both signed on as co-sponsors of the legislation. So it has support. And I think passing it is going to be really important before 2024. So I'm really hopeful if we get an omnibus budget for the next year, which I'm going to continue to lobby for, then I think we'll get it done.
Questions from the audience? The Honorable Bob Baines.
Senator, welcome.
So nice to see you, Bob.
Good to see you as well. First of all, thank you for your unparalleled leadership in New Hampshire and the nation. It's really appreciated. My wife and I did something last night we hardly ever do. We watched a meeting of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. I consider that like a crime scene going into...
Was that like PTSD?
I know, yeah. And homelessness was a huge issue last night. Jim and I were talking about the table. It's such a complex issue. They're blocking a sidewalk in Manchester now. There's a lot of activity around it. As a former mayor, I get concerned about the economic vitality, the impact on, my son's a restaurateur, how that's going to affect his businesses and others. There's a daycare center next to it. They estimate depending on who you talk to, estimate between 600 to 1,000 homeless people in various situations, some couch surfing. Affordable housing is an issue, but it was said last night, some of these people couldn't even afford $1 for housing. We need the help of the state government, the federal government. It's a problem in cities across America. I'd like to hear your viewpoint on that.
Well, I agree, Bob. And one of the real strong aspects of politics in New Hampshire is that we've been able to work together at the federal, state, and local level to address challenges that we face. And we've got to continue to do that, and this is one of those areas where it's really important. That's why I talked about my concern for the rental assistance money. A little bit different, except that one of the things that happened in COVID is a lot of people lost the ability to continue to afford their rent. And that's why this rental assistance money was so important, and why we need to do everything we can to make sure that it gets out to the people who need it and helps keep them in their homes so they can get back to work. What I think you're talking about, though, requires more help than just rental assistance, because for those people who are chronically homeless, they need not just a roof over their heads, they need some wraparound social services. And we have some programs in the state that do a really good job. Some here in Manchester, Families in Transition. We had a wonderful breakfast with Families in Transition here right before Thanksgiving. And they talked about some of their efforts to expand housing for people who are homeless. But we're not doing enough in order to ensure that people have the help they need. And again, that's why I'm so concerned when we get investments like we've had from the federal government. We need to think about how we can use them most effectively. There was funding that came into the county level because of the American Rescue Plan. Cheshire County worked with a consultant to take those dollars and look at how they could use them most effectively to provide social services for people, to support businesses in the state. And really we're thoughtful about how to make use of those dollars in a way that lays a foundation for the future. And that's what we've got to think about with respect to homelessness. And we all need to work together to do that.
Other questions? Senator? Yes, sir? She's going to come over the mic.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have a comment first.
Can I ask you to introduce
Introduce
yourself?
yourself.
I know Bob, but we haven't met.
Oh, my name is Marcus Scott. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. I have my notes there written down, but I wanted to start with a comment. I didn't grow up here in New Hampshire. I've been here about 25 years. I'm from California, from Oakland, California. And The one thing I love about coming here, and it's what you guys have talked about, is that primary. I love the idea of going and seeing both Republicans and Democrats, and I take advantage of that all the time because you just get to see the walks of life here. So I wanted to say thank you for fighting to keep that the way it is.
It is something, and the other thing that I didn't mention, but you may be speaking to, is that independents in New Hampshire can vote in either the Democratic or the Republican primary. And it's great because it means that independents weigh in and we have a sense of what they're thinking about that parties don't always get when it's an insular primary.
Well, see, for me, it's important because, you know, I vote one way, but I did get to see the other perspectives, and it just, you know, helps me tighten up what I'm going to do when I vote. And I have gone off script sometimes because of it. That was my comment. My question is, I'd like to talk about the Ukraine for a minute. You know, Russia is invading the Ukraine, it's breaking. It broke my heart to see what all those people are going through, and the fact that we've taken leadership in giving them equipment to help fight back, and it's working from what I can see. And thank you for your leadership in that. Poland is doing something heroic in taking in refugees and helping people out. And I know that the United States has put some people in Poland. Do you think that would be a permanent thing, having troops go into Poland and helping Poland stay solid in that respect?
I do think that we are going to keep troops in Poland for some time. Poland would like to have us station more troops in the country. Right now, we're working through NATO, and we've expanded forces from NATO in not just Poland, but also in the Baltics and Romania. And I think we will continue to do that for some time to come, because what we have learned is that we have to deal with autocrats and dictators like Putin. And the best way to do that is to ensure that we have the defensive forces to deter him from doing that.
Jeff?
Hi, Senator. I'm Jeff Bielman, the CEO of the International Institute of New England. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
You came to one of our
Yes,
offices.
I remember.
And you only wanted to talk to the clients, not the staff, or not to me. So my question is, we have Centric Care Alliance, International Institute of New England, have resettled hundreds of Afghan humanitarian parolees in the state, and also now are seeing Ukrainians. And the Afghans who are here, the 82,000 Afghans who came to the United States of America, came here mostly on humanitarian parole. That's their status.
Right.
And you know those folks all served by the side of our soldiers and sailors and Marines in Afghanistan. And they're all asking for the passage of the Afghan Adjustment Act.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you can give us an update on that law. And that law, for everyone's benefit, would allow them to get a pathway to green card to stay permanently in the United States.
I'm really glad you raised that because of Afghanistan, but also because it speaks to the immigration challenge that we're facing in this country. And it's not clear to me that we're going to get the Afghan Adjustment Act passed in this session of the legislature, though it has strong support on both sides of the aisle. One of the challenges, we were hoping that it could get put on the defense authorization bill, but for various reasons, that did not happen. And it's not clear to me that we're going to be able to get it on the omnibus. But I think it's important. And the whole issue of immigration is critical. And I'm talking about legal immigration now. Legal immigration in the United States is at the lowest point that it's been in my lifetime. And it's been that way for the last 5 years. You want to know why we have a worker shortfall? Well, that's one of the reasons. Because the people we were depending on to help with our workforce are not allowed into the United States anymore. And I think we've got to do something about that. I think it's a huge challenge, and the Afghan refugees who are here are a great example of that. Most of those people want to work. They want to build a new life in the United States, and we need to let them do that. So I think it's one of the next huge challenges that we're facing. You know, I was at the Kennedy School and Harvard after I left the governor's office. And I remember the dean of the Kennedy School at that time, David Ellsworth, he was an expert in workforce. And he showed us these charts that said by the teens and the early 20s in the United States, we are going to be relying on older workers and immigrants because we don't have enough workers. And we've got to address this issue in a way that allows us to get the people we need to continue to stay competitive. So thank you for everything that you all are doing.
Well, I'm told that the senator is on a very, very tight schedule, so we're going to have to conclude this. But as she just said to you, Jen, thank you for all you do. We want to thank the senator for all that she does. And what a laundry list of accomplishments. And I think it's safe to say her fingerprints are on all those pieces of legislation. So very fortunate to have her in our state, in our delegation in the United States Senate. So with that, thank you, Senator. We get a couple of quick speeches and then